So, hello everybody. Let me introduce myself. You've already mentioned that I'm Richard Mapes. I work for YPlan. You may not be aware of what YPlan does, so let me just run over that quickly. What YPlan does is we have an app for going out. And what that means is that you can go to your mobile phone and you can find events that you want to do tonight, tomorrow, and you can book them through the app, which means that all of the old school, I went to Google, I couldn't find anything to do, and there were no tickets when I got there. It's easy. You just go, all right, what do I want to do tonight? Oh, look, there's some cool event about Looker. Maybe I can go to that. Immediately book a ticket, if we were booking tickets, and just come down here, which is very useful. But what that means is that we have a whole load of people in the company who are desperately trying to understand how to make the product better, how to find the right people to market to, trying to work out if we're being profitable, which all relies on data. And as many people have mentioned already, one of the things about data and being a data team is that you find that you're inundated with questions. You can't actually do any real work because you're constantly trying to answer all the questions that people come to you with. And the thing about our users is that they're really bright, they're really clever, and you give them the right information and they can ask amazing questions, and they can do incredible things. I have seen the most ridiculous things. I've seen an entire automated trading system built in Excel. Now, I don't recommend anyone to do that, but it was quite impressive, even if slightly misguided. But the thing about all our users is they're really clever, but they really hate SQL. They just don't get it. They don't get even the notion of tabular data and joins and relationships. They just understand the concept of there's some stuff I want to know about, and that's got some properties. And the other thing that they don't get sometimes is some of the complexities of dealing with data. They don't understand, for instance, that if you're going to look at all of our profitability, you probably want to exclude all the test events where we put in $1 million just to see what happened. So along comes Looker. And this is our tool for making the data available across the company. We don't want to be, as a data team, standing there going, no, you can't touch the data, that's our remit. But at the same time, one thing that terrifies me is when someone comes to me and says, I've done this data analysis, it's brilliant. And you go, oh my God, what mistakes have you made? So what do? We can do things that enable us to make the data available to our customers so they can understand them. And by customers, I mean internal customers. They can understand the data. They don't have to worry about joins and SQL and all those complexities, but we can hide the mistakes. We can make sure we present the data in a way that gets rid of some of that complexity. So what do? Well, we use entities versus tables. We make it into a form that people get. You know, if I say to you, I've got 3 tables and you've got to join across them, and you've got to make sure you use an inner join rather than an outer join, I get a lot of blank stares from most of my teams. If I say to them, we need to find out how many customers came to the app in the last month and booked for the first time, it makes sense. It's clear. So we spend a lot of time converting all of our information into forms which can be understood in terms of entities. We also reshape the data. We obviously have a lot of data in forms which are useful for our back end. Our data comes from the events that go on in the mobile app and the events that come out of the back end and the data that is used to drive the app. Most of that has names which make sense to developers. Most of that is in forms which aren't particularly accessible. So it's really useful to reshape that data, to turn it into a form that makes sense. And while we're at it, we can actually hide some of those gotchas. We also use persistent-derived tables. And the reason we do that is that, as was mentioned in the previous talk, people often make really, really dumb queries. Not because they're stupid, but they don't realize that this query will actually take 4 hours to run. And we don't want that to happen. So we can protect ourselves by making sure that all of the queries which are most likely to kill the database, we can have got into a form that they can already access, we can optimize it, and we can do it for them. And then finally, separation of concerns. We try to make sure that all of our users don't get overwhelmed with information. We've got a lot of teams. We've got a marketing team, we've got a sales team, we've got product development, and they all have different stuff they know about and different stuff they care about. It turns out that our product team, for instance, really cares about how a particular event performed last week. But they don't necessarily care about whether a customer came from Lambeth or came from Wandsworth. Similarly, our product team really care about what's happening based on various features, but they don't really want to go into the details of conversion rates within a single deal. And if we throw too much information at them, what happens is they just get confused. They don't know what to pick. They don't know what to use to make the query that they're trying to make. And so we try to hide as much stuff as possible, or at least put it in different areas, so that they know where to go. They can understand what they're looking for. How do we do this? Well, let's talk about entities. One of the things we try to do is we try to minimize the number of entities we actually expose to people. So I talked about customers, and we have a set of customers. We also have information about the bookings they make. We have information about the events they book. And if someone comes to me and says, okay, tell me the number of customers that booked an event last month where it was on a Tuesday. Well, that's great. I can do that in the bookings table. But if they say to me, find me all the customers which spent more than £5,000 last month, well, where do I do that? Do I do it in the bookings table? Do I do it in the customer table? And the problem is the more options we give people, the harder it is to do it right, because it turns out there's always little gotchas. For instance, if we do it in the customer table, probably we've only summarized it to total spend. Whereas if we do it in the bookings table, they can look at that particular time period and go, well, let's find the spend for that period. And if they do a query where they actually try to say, find me all the customers who spent more than £5,000 in total and then were created in the last month, they'll probably get it wrong. They'll probably do something weird. So what we try to do is we try to make sure that the routes to those queries are obvious. We try to say, well, actually, if you want to do something on customers, you go to the customer table. If it's about revenue and it's about time periods, you go to the bookings table. And there are certain tables, certain entities we don't expose at all. So for instance, events, yeah, it seems obvious you should have an entity for events if you want to find information about those. But actually, events are for a fixed time period. We start selling tickets and we finish selling tickets. And most of the things people want to know about that is how many people booked, how much money did we get from it, and what kind of people booked. Well, all of that comes from the bookings table. We don't need another entity. And if we add another entity in, everyone gets confused. In fact, we had a previous model which was just throw it all in. And what we found was that fewer and fewer people were using it because they just didn't know what to do. And when they did use it, they'd make a mistake, and then we became the bad guys again because we're going back to them saying, oh, I know you've done all this work, but you're wrong. And no one likes being told they're wrong. So our new model is based on trying to just have a very small set of entities that all the things people want to know can come from. There's some interesting gotchas here. Counts are really useful here because when you join to a table, I mentioned that we can calculate all the customers for a given booking. They automatically become count distincts. You can see from this query here that by doing this query on the booking entity, we actually have a count distinct on customer. So that's great. We can find out how many customers did this. But look at that. The actual bookings, the count for that table itself is just a count. And it turns out that if we don't keep track of what's going on, if we join to something which is a one-to-many join, and I tried this out earlier, I actually joined the number of customers for each type of credit card they had registered. I found I had more customers in my database than I had. Let me clarify that. I did it without splitting out by credit card, and I got one number. And then I looked at the number of credit cards and segmented by that, and I got a higher number in total because some customers had multiple credit cards. And there's loads of measures like that. We have sums, we have averages. And one of the things that we're constantly trying to do is try to avoid allowing people to make mistakes that, to them, are not obvious. They're doing the obviously right thing, and they're still getting the wrong answer. So a lot of work has to go in to trying to make sure that when you expose data to a lot of people who aren't SQL experts, who aren't data experts, You don't let them make mistakes by doing something that gives you the wrong answer by doing the right thing. Reshaping data. Let me give you an example of how we reshape the data. One of the things that we have to do, as I said earlier, is exclude test data. Now, this is an example of the kind of query we have to use to try and identify what a test event is. I've been a little bit naughty in that I have not told you everything. In fact, that was the first one we did. Then we discovered that actually also our team were marking test events by adding in special lists of customers that the data was available to. And then we found they were also doing another thing where they were using a slightly different flag which was built into the system that no one had been told about. And then we found they were doing another thing, which was they were also actually adding stuff to the notes field. So it turned out there were like 15 different ways in which you could work out something with a test event. Now, if we didn't have Looker in front of this data, we would have to say to everyone, every time you want to query the database, here is the list of clauses you have to put in order to make sure you exclude all the test data. I guarantee that they'll forget one of them. Most of the time, I guarantee they'll forget all of them. But by putting it in here, we get two things. First of all, it means that we can automatically pre-filter this. We can say, look, here's an auto-filter, which is just on, I've got the wrong name for that dimension. That should be is test. Sorry about that. But by putting in this test filter, we can automatically say, well, by default, you'll exclude all the test events. And if you want to, you can change it. Then I need to know all the details about why it's a test event, which is even better because we've recently fixed the data warehouse to actually have a table and a flag which says all these events are test events, which means we can change that. We can go in and we can make this cleaner. And if we hadn't got this in the way, we'd have to go to every single one of our customers and say to them, oh, and by the way, when you do your queries, you need to change it. All the queries you've got existing, change them, all the dashboards, change them. With this, no problem. It's just changing the underlying definition, and everything's inherited. Persistent derived tables. I'm just throwing a whole load of stuff at you that we use. Take what you like from it. We found that persistent derived tables are very useful. The stuff I've mentioned so far, pretty much you could do with a data warehouse. I've talked about hiding the complexity. I've talked about having different field names, reshaping the data to hide flags, etc. You could do it with a data warehouse. It's just taking one data set and transforming it to another. But one thing that's always a real pain with data warehouses is trying to make sure that you manage the transformation from one place to another. Sometimes you get queries like this. Now, we could have this as a view. This query takes about 4 or 5 minutes to run. Every time someone did this, if this was a view, then it would take 4 or 5 minutes for them to get an answer. And most of our customers really don't like waiting 4 or 5 minutes of a little spinning icon before they get an answer. We could, if we had a data warehouse, simply run a nightly job to update this. And the great thing about persistent derived tables is that is basically that nightly job, but we don't have to manage it ourselves. So we have the advantage that we can, at any time, regenerate the table. We can change the period over which it's regenerated. We can set triggers. We don't have to manage the process of running that. It's all built into Looker. So a few final tips and tricks for extra stuff. One of the things we found is that you can actually use derived tables as temporary tables to simplify more complex queries. So when we first started using Looker, we were writing these big, long queries with subselects and all kinds of weird stuff in them. And it looked an absolute mess, and we certainly couldn't maintain it. And then we discovered you don't need to expose a view. You don't need people to see it. You can actually refer to those views from other views. So suddenly we found ways of building up very quite complex queries, but with very readable code. I would show you it, but I've got it on a link, and I really don't want to bother logging in and wasting all your time. Other things includes. It turns out that all of the imports you do within Looker actually just import all of the text into the main file. So you end up with one big file, as if you'd just written it all in one go. which means you can actually split up your code any way you like. We found this to be a very, very useful tool. For one thing, it means that we can actually define our own naming convention. So we have a way of defining which of our explorers belong to which model, which means that it's very easy for us to go in and define the definition of each of our base views in one file without having to then go, all right, how do I find it? Where is it? We know where stuff is. You don't have one model with everything in one big blob. You don't have to search through it and try and find out what you defined. You just go to the place where I've defined it and go, right, let's add an extra field, add extra join. We also have a set of base views. You can see a naming convention here, base underscore customer booking summary. Why base? Because we can share that across all our views. I can use that in every single report I want to generate. It means that I can now start generating different models for different people. I mentioned earlier that one of the things we're doing is trying to separate concerns so that if I have a sales team and they don't care about a particular set of information, I can just show them the views, the looks that they want to see. I've got a whole load of stuff in the Explore under the list of sales. But I've defined the actual underlying view that the report is made up of in this base view, which means I can now reuse that in a whole bunch of different models, each one of which is aimed at a slightly different audience. And I can restrict fields, I can do different joins, I can do lots of stuff that makes it make more sense without having to expose every single part of that. And finally, the fact is that by exposing these different models, we're allowed to do a lot better access control. And once again, this is really useful because people don't like having information thrown at them. People like to just have enough to get by. They want to know the things they want to know. They don't want to have so much choice that they can't even get started. Hopefully, that is enough to get you going.